Welcome to Trailblaze. I am Jamal Simmons.
And I am Nayyera Haq. Trailblaze is about the America we are becoming and the politics, policies, and the ideas that are getting us there. Today, we want to talk about another voting demographic. We've already covered voting, math, what states are really important this election cycle. We've talked about white women, about white dudes, but there's a lot of other demographics out there, Jamal.
Absolutely, there are a lot of demographics out there. We haven't gone through all the things people are talking about. There's African American men. There's what happened with the Arab American vote in states like in the Middle Eastern vote in states like Michigan. And of course today we're going to talk about Latino voters and where are they on this upcoming election.
I would have loved to just call this episode the brown people vote. It's a very scientific term, but really, right, we talk about politics like white and black, and then kind of everybody else, Asian Americans as a demographic, something like 20 million voters in this election cycle, where in places like Nevada, that's 4% of the vote. In places like Wisconsin, that's significant too. So these percentage points, as you and I have talked about, with the polls as tight as they are, they can make all the difference in whether Kamala or Donald gets that state in those electoral votes.
Absolutely. And what we know is that there are all these overlaps that happen between communities, right? I mean, now we know so many people are intersectional, they live in families that are multicultural. They also are sharing a lot of demographics. Like if you live in a suburb, we talk about the suburban vote, but we talk about the suburban vote sometimes like we're talking about the 1980s. And this is just some John Hughes movie with a bunch of people riding bicycles in white neighborhoods. And now what we know is that the suburban vote is also in many ways, it's Asian American, it's Latino, it's African American. Yep. All of them might be in the same house, right?
I love reminding people.
We might see a lot of that, right?
Yeah, I love reminding the pollsters of many of them are people that you and I sit on television sets with, where they're largely talking to people who are boomers and older. I'm like, hi, I'm a suburban soccer mom. Literally, right. I have soccer practice today. I have flag football practice on Saturday. I go to the games. I organize snacks. And I'm a working parent who cares about X, Y, and Z issues. And this system was not designed to reflect the challenges and also the concerns that I have. So that is a fundamental shift. And we're seeing that not just in this, how we talk about suburban voters, but this idea of who Latino voters are.
Can I ask you one important question? What's your snack of choice for the soccer game?
Okay. So mini Gatorades, but we have gone in this calorie, sugar concerned era to Gatorade Zero. The kids love those. Goldfish and maybe some kind of chip. And some kind of chip, depending on the age range. Goldfish I usually do for the 4-year-old. The 7 or 8-year-old, they want the chips. Now, one mom showed up with all of that, like those two things, the drink and the snack, plus Oreos. And I was like, oh, come on, you extra. Like, stop. Like, you just need to not up the ante. Make it easy for every parent to do the bare minimum when it comes to snack. Don't be the parent that shows up and outperforms everyone else.
Absolutely. And we now have these multicolored goldfish. I feel like goldfish are the Iron Man, Iron Woman of the snack game. You can kind of take them anywhere, give them to anybody. They're just fantastic.
Anyway, it's a kid's Cheez-It, right? Like I can eat a box of Cheez-Its in one sitting.
It's true. It's true. I digress. But, this is very important because, as we think about what's happening inside these communities and we think about these suburban communities in particular, we are talking to people in places where we didn't normally find them. We didn't used to find them. But what we find is that they also have a lot of the same concerns. So they have these concerns about school safety. They have these concerns about traffic patterns. They have concerns about development and economics and, are taking care of parents. I mean, we know right now there's a big conversation in politics right now about the sandwich generation and people who are trapped between taking care of their young kids and then also taking care of their older parents. That's happening inside of all these communities. And we know particularly with communities of color, they've been multi-generational for a long time. And so we've seen grandma living in the same house with the grandkids. And now we're finally having that conversation in public.
And there are communities of color have largely been able to maintain that multi-generational communal family connection that significantly helps when it comes to being working parents raising kids. What I find interesting, though, when we talk about this generational change is the assumption that people often have that a first generation of immigrants will feel the same way as their children about issues like immigration, about culture war value issues, and all of those. And we're seeing, frankly, from that second, the born in America or I became a citizen early and I've been here 40 years in America person, that they're not necessarily lefty when it comes to immigration, right? There's that identity messaging versus the opportunity and economic messaging has really worked in many of these communities where I interviewed somebody who was a Guatemalan American, had been here for 20 years, did a lot to support his family and community back in Guatemala, owns a coffee shop here in DC, sent, like all of this really great connection and positive trade, all of this, and was like, no, but you all have to come legally. Like I did the hard work, therefore you should do the hard work too. And it's a very interesting distinction to me of that identity, how you become American and what American means, that is starting to change even in minority communities.
That's right. One thing that's been very popular is enforcing the border. We've seen that in the national politics. We've seen politicians on both sides of the aisle really get tougher on the border, which I think for a lot of activists, some of it's like chalkboard, nails on a chalkboard, hearing what some of those policies are.
Mm-hmm.
But so many people across demographics are concerned about how people come to the country. Now, they're also concerned about how we police that border and how we treat people when they get here. And I think that's the place where people who are on the left need to continue to talk more about what do we do with the folks who are here already and how do we make sure they're integrated into society and how do we keep that pathway open for people who need to come here because they're fleeing something that's pretty desperate in the country where they came from. And what we cannot do is pull the ladder up, shut the door for everybody else who wants to come to the country. And frankly, you know who else doesn't want that to happen? American business doesn't want it to happen because the workforce that comes to this country from around the world is part of what keeps the engine of our economy going.
I
So that's
love
part of our
referencing
conversation today.
this. Reagan's last speech from the White House was like an ode to economic purposes for immigration. And Reagan was a high water mark for accepting refugees. And it has steadily declined from there. And Reagan talked all about agriculture and what immigration does positively for an economy. And you talk to any farmers and like, just get us workers. If you're not going to get us legally, if you're not going to give us the visas for them to come and go, we're just going to take the workers we can. And farmers often, right, we think of as in the bucket of Republican anti-immigration. So it's a really interesting narrative that's taken place. And I think Democrats ceded territory on this, Jamal, where they went in on the enforcement, but didn't talk about necessarily the dignity of how you're treated at a border. Because you can have
Yeah.
enforcement and still have dignity of how you're treated. The idea of Custom and Border Patrol agents whipping Haitian migrants, probably not a good image, right? Should probably
Hmm.
check that at the border and not have that be. And that's a distinction because I think there's people who are very happy with that, are perfectly happy
Right.
with cruelty being part of the equation. And that's that distinction, while still staying in the lane of order and process, could be very, very compelling. I just don't think that Democrats have
Well,
figured that out yet.
this is the fun. This is the fundamental problem with the Trump era because even Republicans, you reference back to Reagan, I still always think about George W. Bush on this question. Even Republicans always had a sense of, well, maybe we're America first, and maybe we're talking about, quote unquote, traditional American culture, and we know what that is.
Mm-hmm.
But they also had a little bit of like, well, we have to respect people. We've got to figure out how it is that we communicate about this. We don't want to do people harm. They were anti-political violence, right? We're not
Yeah.
having that conversation. Even after 9/11, this is what I think about George W. Bush. After 9/11, one of the first things George W. Bush did was go to a mosque.
Mm-hmm.
And he went and said, these are our neighbors,
Mm-hmm.
and we can't be at war with our neighbors. We're at war with people who attacked us from another country, not with our neighbors. And gosh, can you think about how far we are away
Well, listen, and
from
they
having
certainly.
Republicans who would say things like that in
Well,
public?
that's the thing. We're like, can you at least just say that? Like, versus you don't even bother to say that anymore, right? There are clearly anti-immigration policies. There's clearly
Sure.
cruelty in policies that have happened since then. But that idea of a baseline benchmark of how we talk to people overseas. And then there's that classic situation, right? Take the brown vote, as I call it, and
Hmm.
separate that out from the black vote. Do not
Right.
let these groups combine, especially not with white working class, because that would just be, that's it, game over. You get
Absolutely.
that economic solidarity going game over. So make brown people feel to some degree that they are better than this, even if they're not white. And you see this having played out with affirmative action admissions, where Asian Americans were, there was a group that led on behalf of Asian Americans that this is discriminatory towards them, blah, blah, blah. Great. Okay. Supreme Court buys it. It's done. Guess whose enrollment drops in colleges? Asian Americans. Wow. What did you think was going to happen there? But they were like, oh, you're taking
Right.
black people and not brown people. That's what you're doing, right? That's how this translates in a day-to-day basis, this idea of pitting these groups against each other.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, I always wonder when it comes to affirmative action, when you look at these college admissions and you see some of these, 70%, 65% of the school is still white, 75% of the school is white. And then, you get the small number of people who are coming from Black and brown and Latino, communities. It's like, well, if you can't get one of the 70% of the seats, then maybe you should check your own ability, right? It's not really about whether or not the people who look like us are getting a seat. The question is, why can't you compete with the other 70% of the people who are getting the seats who look just like you? But
Yep.
anyway, that's
Well, California
it's
just
another
passed.
show.
Well, California did just pass law that they're not gonna they're eliminating legacy admissions. So that should be fun because we all know the money, mama and daddy's money, is the biggest affirmative action out there in American systems.
Yeah, I'll believe that has an impact when I see it. Money always finds a way to find its way in the door. So
I need to find
we'll
its way in
see.
my pocket. That's where I need it to go.
I'm with you, sister.